Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today you're in for a treat because you're seeing me punish myself. And I am choosing to punish myself, and in some ways I enjoy this because as bodybuilders we are a little bit like this, we're a bit wired in this way. And yeah, you're going to see me taking some sets as close to failure as what I can possibly get to. So about 0 reps in reserve. Some of these might be 1 rep in reserve in hindsight watching it, but in that moment it will have felt like 0 reps in reserve, which brings me to my first point that I wanted to discuss today, and that is the kind of relative intensities in terms of using a rep in reserve scale or reps from failure, or even an RPE, rate of perceived exertion. These are all somewhat subjective, but also they are objective. So like 1 rep in reserve is an objective measure, but 9 RPE, which is often synonymous with that, is a little bit different because you felt like you had 1 rep. So I think we have to always just take that into consideration when we are talking about relative intensities, as they are somewhat subjective, but they also are individual. So for example, you'll see here on many of my sets, I can grind, and you might look at, and some of you might look at me performing these sets and be like, you're done, you haven't got any more left. And then I go again, and maybe I go again. Some of you might be watching these sets and you watch me and you think, why are you racking it? You've got another one in you. And that's because we're all slightly different in terms of what our kind of rep in reserve will look like, for example. I think there is a general rule of thumb in that as you approach failure, you should see your concentric speed slow down. But that will look different person to person, also muscle group to muscle group, and also potentially exercise to exercise. Let me give you an example where it might look different exercise to exercise. So, for example, on a bent over row, because of the position you're in, it's much harder up at the top than at the bottom. So generally, if we're going to define a good repetition or a standardized repetition, is to the floor to belly. Bar touches the floor to belly. So you're failing when you can't perform that. However, if we're talking about a machine row that's chest supported, it's far easier to kind of bring it all the way back and use that chest support and almost brace yourself into it. And this might be an argument why you might use one over the other, sure, or they can be used complementary. But your form failure on a bent over row, I think, or rather your naught RAR, will probably look much less dramatic than maybe on particularly like a prime, for example, or a strive machine row, because you can even make it slightly easier in the position that it's hardest. So in that shortened position when you're pulling it right towards yourself, and you've got that chest support and all those different things. So you can even see a difference there. And there may be differences across multiple different exercises and, like I said, muscle groups as well. For example, even if you think about a leg curl versus a Romanian deadlift, you're not going to see that Romanian deadlift come to like a grinding halt. Like, yeah, you're going to see concentric speed slow, just like a bent over row, but you're not in a position where it's safe and productive to be able to like grind reps out. It's just very unlikely that you're going to see that happen. Whereas on a leg curl, you might, seated, lying, standing, whatever it is, and maybe it's different even between those, you might find yourself able to like grind a rep out, for example. Or like even, like I said, it's a barbell back squat. It's a compound lift. It's much more complex. You're not going to like grind so much your final rep on that. Whereas on leg extensions, you're in a really good position to grind out reps. And in fact, your last 5 reps might all look a little bit grindy, you know? So you just have to bear all of that in mind. And this is why people will give kind of relative intensities a little bit of a hard time, because it is an added layer of complexity to your training. But when I say this, I absolutely, it is a worth kind of trade-off in terms of complexity and the difficulty of application for all the pros that it provides, because it really provides a framework for a lot of our training, because now we can be really smart with our application of reps in reserve and relative intensities to maximize a stimulus to fatigue trade-off. Because if you just take the approach of it's really challenging to utilize this, you might end up saying, okay, let's just train to failure all the time. And that very may well work for a bunch of people, especially if you're more novice. But as you get more advanced and that kind of stimulus to fatigue trade-off becomes more imperative to your training, you need to get that stimulus, and to get as much stimulus as possible, we need to make sure that we're managing fatigue as best as we can. And so you might want to start utilizing it a little bit more, because we're better able to manage our kind of fatigue and stimulus, and that can be incredibly productive. So I think it's absolutely worth it. And also the great thing is failure training is a great teaching tool, because it's essentially like, okay, Icarus to the sun or whatever it is, like this is where I get burnt, naught reps in reserve or whatever, failure. So I can just take a few steps back and I can just get a little bit hot. And I'm like, as long as I get a little bit hot, I know I'm in the range of productive. This is productive, whatever it is. It's a bit of a weird analogy. But now I'm going to like progressively get a little bit hotter, a little bit hotter. And then I get tinged and I'm like, okay, now I kind of take a step back and I go again. So I think it's just that kind of, it's such a great teaching tool, and it can be so incredibly productive. But when you are approaching where I am now, it's like, okay, so how did I get here? Well, I started off my mesocycle knowing that I was challenging the muscles in and around 3 to 4 reps from naught RAR from failure. And every single week, I'm looking to add either a small amount of load, around 2%, 2.5%, or a repetition. And therefore, every week I'm edging closer, just like Icarus to the sun. He's edging closer, edging closer, edging closer, or edging closer to that cliff, for example. And you basically kind of flirt with that cliff or with the sun and that tinge, and you get a bit burnt, or you like start stumbling and you're like, right, I'm at that edge now, I'm at that cliff's edge, I need to pull myself back, kind of quote unquote deload, and then I can go again. And so it isn't this scary thing. It's like, okay, so if you started too far away from that cliff or from the sun, you might find yourself having more steps you can take, and you can go for more and more weeks. It's like, and now you know, right, next time I don't need to start so far back, I can start a little bit closer. So that kind of experience and that exposure, you just get better and better with this thing. And so when I'm coming into these training sessions, I almost already know it's going to be naught RAR, because I know last week was more than likely 1 RAR. And on some of these sets, actually the first set you will have seen me perform here, I wasn't sure I would have got that last rep. I really wasn't sure. It was like a bit of a question mark. And I don't recommend people take those reps very often, because I think, especially in some scenarios, it's just not worth it. But let me give you the context I was in. So I knew that by getting that rep, I'd only have progressed from my last mesocycle by like 5 kilos. Not a huge like increase in performance, which is appropriate given my training age. So I knew it was in like my scope of probably should be able to improve by that much. Also in a mass gaining phase, so I've got that surplus, so I know I'm more anabolic, more responsive to training, more likely to make those positive adaptations. I'm also in a hack squat. It's a pretty risk-free movement to fail on, because what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to go down, come up, and then I'm going to have to kind of have that horrible fall into the bottom of the machine and then just crawl out. Like, it's not a problem, whereas doing it on other lifts is much more risky. And sometimes you have to push yourself and almost fail to know where your limits are. And I like testing myself now and then, when it's safe, when it's appropriate, when it makes sense. And I was close on that rep. It may have looked like I was very confident and like it was a clean and easy repetition for me. It wasn't. It was like I had to fight for that, and it was quite nerve-wracking, to be honest. But all these sessions, I know I'm getting here, knowing that in this week, when I'm approaching this naught reps in reserve, I'm still within or at my MRV, so my max recoverable volume. So I know I can perform here. So I come into this very, very confident. It isn't like every session I'm coming in like anxious and worried I'm not going to hit my reps. It's like, no. I come in every session knowing I should hit these reps. Now, sometimes they frighten me, particularly in that week before deloading. But I know I should hit them. So I go in confident. Nothing worse than going into a set underconfident, because you've already lost before you go into it. So that's why I love this kind of methodical use of reps in reserve, because I can go in each session confident and know, like, if I nail my variables in terms of take care of my sleep, take care of my nutrition, doing everything I should do with stress management, those sort of things, like basic stuff, not crazy anything. Maybe take my pre-workout like I normally do for these kind of overreaching sessions. I should be in there and I should be able to have very productive workouts where I hit like mini PRs. And that's the goal for me. I don't have numbers in my mind that I need to like achieve by the end of the off season, but I do in every meso want to look to achieve mini PRs. And that's normally just a repetition or a small amount of additional load. And that's me as someone who is an advanced natural bodybuilder. If you are less advanced, maybe you hit better than mini PRs, you hit like medium PRs, there might be a couple of reps, like 5% additional load. And it somewhat does depend also on how long you've been performing that movement for. If it's quite new, then maybe you can hit that medium PR quite comfortably, and I can too. But as you've been training with a lift for longer and longer and longer, those adaptations, that adaptive resistance builds up, it gets tougher and tougher. But in a roundabout way, I think this vlog has just been me reflecting on how much these sets sucked, and you got to watch me torture myself a little bit, how I got to this point in a productive way, and how I came into these sets very confident but still testing myself, and how you might want to use that and apply that and use reps in reserve, and just some discussion surrounding reps in reserve. I had no real topic at mind. It just kind of naturally came along as I started speaking. So as ever, guys, if there is anything specifically you'd like to see in these vlogs that you would like me to do let me know, because I'll look to cover those. As always, do drop your comments, questions, all that good stuff below. Please give it a thumbs up, share it with anyone you think would be interested, and yeah, subscribe if you haven't. If you've watched several of these, if you listen to the podcast, you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Please subscribe. That'd be great. And you can turn on notifications too, so you know when these come out. Otherwise, I'm right now at the end, coming to the end of my deload week from like that was last week, and I'm coming to the end of my deload week here. My tattoo is healing nicely. It's in that kind of awkward stage at the moment, and I'm excited to get into what will probably be my last most definitely my last mass mesocycle before I take a bit of an active recovery, for which I want to plan something to do that week. So I have to have a bit of a think about that. But for now, guys, thank you for watching, and I guess I talk to you soon. Take care.